Welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I started an eco conscious pottery company called Oxford Clay. Now, Oxford Clay, I don't just make pottery, I also make books and courses for other potters who want to be more environmentally friendly in their pottery making. And that's what this podcast is all about. And I can't wait to get started. Let's go. In this episode, we're going to be talking about making pottery glazes. And when you're working with any powders in pottery, powdered rocks, powdered clays, ashes, you must always use an FFP3 face mask to protect your lungs. Hello, welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm your host, Catherine Tomlinson, and thank you so much for joining me on this episode today, where we're going to be talking about how to make a pottery glaze for total beginners. If you've never made a pottery glaze before, this episode's for you. We're going to just be going through the steps. And if you think like that's not something you can do, you're not to say you're wrong, but you million percent can make a pottery glaze. If you can cook anything, you're bringing together different ingredients, you can make a pottery glaze. Exactly the same principle. You're just bringing those ingredients together in different amounts, mixing them together, mixing them with water. You've made a pottery glaze. Okay, so that's what we're going to be talking about in this episode. I just wanted to show you how easy it is to make your own pottery glaze and the different kind of things, just the different decisions you make at different points about like yeah, we'll get onto how to actually make the pottery glaze. So if you wanted this episode, this information basically in a totally free guide. It's in the show notes. So there's a link to it in the show notes. It's called How to Make a Pottery Glaze, a complete beginner's guide to making your own pottery glaze in 5 simple steps. That's basically what we're going to be doing in this episode. And the only difference is that this one will have it with pictures, and it also has a recipe in there for you. It's a stoneware glaze recipe. So it tells you exactly how to do it. So yeah, that's there for you if you want it. So um, okay, so the first thing to say is that before you make any glaze, you really need to get yourself an FFP3 face mask. So this is because the powders involved in making in the glaze making, so it's like powdered rocks, powdered clays. These are really dangerous if you breathe them in. They're basically they can cause a condition called silicosis in your lungs, and as long as you protect your lungs properly with an FFP3 face mask, which is the lowest level of protection you need, this will filter out. They usually have some kind of filtration device that will just, like a paper. This one's got waves of paper that just filter out those particles. They form a seal, the mask forms a seal around your nose and mouth. It just stops you from breathing in any of those particles. So that's the only thing to say. You must get that before you start making pottery glazes, before you start working with any pottery powders. Okay, so there you are. You've got your face mask. The next step is to find a recipe, a pottery glaze recipe. So what you need to decide at this point is whether to make an earthenware pottery glaze or a stoneware pottery glaze. So the difference between these two is that earthenware pottery glazes, they're sometimes known as like medium fire or low fire, and then glazes, and then stoneware pottery glazes are also known as high fire pottery glazes. So they are fired at a higher temperature than earthenware glazes. So some kilns, for example, some electric kilns, only go up to earthenware temperatures. And so you will only be able to make and fire earthenware glazes in those kilns. But if you have a kiln that can go up to stoneware temperatures, so I mean, stoneware temperatures can even go up to like kind of 1,300. I fire mine to 1,260 degrees Celsius. That's stoneware temperatures. And if you have a kiln that can go up to stoneware temperatures, or you have access to a kiln, at like a pottery class or something, then you can make either stoneware or earthenware glazes, because you can fire. They'll usually at a pottery class they'll do an earthenware firing and then they'll do a stoneware firing. They have to be done separately because they're different temperatures. So decide which one you'd like to do. And then what you can do is you can search for a glaze making recipe that's the appropriate temperature. Okay, so a really good place to look for glaze recipes are in books. There's loads of pottery books out there on like yeah, how to make glazes and like, well, they'll just like have loads and loads of different recipes in there. If you wanted some recipe books, um, well, actually, how to make a pottery glaze free guide has a recipe in there, for example. It is we'll get onto sort of how to read a glaze recipe as well. 50 parts Cornish stone, 25 parts quartz, 15 parts whiting, and 10 parts dolomite. That's a really simple recipe. Makes a really, really beautiful, really glossy glaze. That's why I use that one for the free guide because it's just it makes such a nice like glossy recipe. But I have like loads of recipes as well in eco-conscious pottery glazing, that book. It's an ebook, and also you can get it if you want a paper copy, you can get it on Amazon as well. And I also have another book called Eco-conscious Pottery Color. That's another book and that's focuses more on like ways of coloring glazes. So it's got loads and it's got like loads of recipes in there about like yeah, different recipes that you can that have color in basically. Whereas eco-conscious pottery glazing, they're more like base glaze recipes. They're all kind of transparent white, transparent transparent and white, some of them ever so slightly colored with a little bit of tiny bit of clay sort of thing. So yeah, so pottery books, they're your best friend in terms of like how, like recipes, pottery glazing books, loads of recipes in there. Another great source of pottery glaze recipes is a website called glazy.org. And this is an amazing website where potters basically upload different recipes, different firing temperatures. So they'll have like the recipe, and then they'll also often upload like a photo of what the glaze looks like. So that's another really great source. It's totally free. You can just log on there, have a look, all the different recipes. You can do searches as well by firing temperature, keyword searches. I searched for ash once to like try and find some ash glazing recipes. So that's a really good source of glaze recipes. Okay, so you got your recipe. You know that it's earthenware or stoneware. Let's say, for example, it's stoneware. You've got your stoneware recipe. You got it from How to Make a Pottery Glaze free workbook. You've got it. So, so the next step is basically to get your ingredients. So, I mean, you're not expected to like go out there, collect some quartz rock, chip it off, and grind it yourself. There are loads of pottery suppliers that will already have these rocks and ingredients in powdered form. So um, you need to, I guess, like find a supplier that's like relatively local to you, and then they will have glazing. They have all these glazing ingredients, and then you can buy them from that pottery supplier. They'll be already powdered, and you can buy them obviously in different amounts and stuff. One thing to say is that I try and find as local mined ingredients as possible. So that's one aspect that I try to do to make my pottery like as eco-friendly as possible. I try, for example, let's say for example a pottery glaze wanted some china clay. I would source my china clay from Cornwall in the UK rather than sourcing china clay from like another part of the world, like maybe really far away, because I want to cut down the kind of transport, like the it's sort of environmental impact of that material getting transported. And also I know kind of like the legislation in the UK. I know that it will be it's robust in terms of like protecting um, the environment. Obviously, obviously mining damages the environment, obviously, but if you're sourcing materials from regions of the world where the legislation is robust, and there's uh, like there's the kind of civic structures in place to be able to bring people who breach, or companies that breach that, to account, breach the legislation. And it's sort of as much as possible, you can reduce the ecological impact of mining that pottery material. So that's what I try and do. I try and get my materials as locally as possible, mined as locally as possible. So, for example, the Cornish stone used in this guide, how to make a pottery glaze, the free guide, I asked my pottery supplier where the quartz came from to make that Cornish stone, because it's no longer mined as Cornish stone. It's a kind of synthetic. It's a product from quartz. Um, I asked my pottery supplier where the quartz came from to make Cornish stone. It's a kind of artificially degraded form of quartz. That's made into Cornish stone nowadays. And they said, "Oh, it's from Scotland." So I know that that's material is like as close to me as possible. The quartz is from Belgium, and then the whiting and dolomite. Again, those two are mined in the UK as well. So um, that's what I wanted. Yeah, I bring all my materials together as locally as possible. So there we go. So um, that's how to get your pottery materials. So pottery suppliers will sell you all of these pottery materials, and you can just yeah, order them and get them. So when they arrive, they will be a powder. So they usually be like a bag of powder. When you're handling them, if you're getting, you're measuring them out, whatever, you always need to be using your FFP3 face mask. Anytime you're working with the powder, make sure you're wearing the face mask. So the next stage is basically to weigh out the ingredients. Just like you were going to make, say if you were going to make like a cake or something, you'd weigh out like the flour and the butter and or the margarine, and you're making a vegan cake and the sugar and stuff. So you would need to get some scales, maybe some kitchen scales. Um, Kitchen scale's absolutely fine for weigh out glazes. And what you do is you get a suitable container, and then you just, wearing your FFP3 face mask, you're weighing out those ingredients according to the proportions in the parts of the recipe. So this is the bit that really confused me before I before I started making loads of glazes. The first time I wanted to make a glaze, I was like, parts? What's happening? Why don't they just tell you so say like for example, you're making a cake, they will tell you the weight of each thing that you're putting in, won't they? They'll say like 175 grams of flour or something like that. But in a glaze recipe, they just tell you the parts. And that's because they don't want to depict, like they don't want to tell you basically how much to make of the glaze. So you might be making a huge vat of that glaze, of kilograms and kilograms of glaze. Or you might be making just a little glaze tester and making like 100 grams of glaze or something. So what you're doing is you're taking the parts and you're applying them proportionally to however much glaze you're making. So a really good starting point, if you just want to make a test, is say like 100 grams of all of to break this. So normally to say as well, yeah, to break the parts down into like 100 grams in total. Normally glazes add up to 100 parts. Not all glaze recipes add up to 100 parts, just to say, but most of them do, but not all of them. But it will be the same principle. So, say for example, you could just make, say you're making a small glaze test with the recipe in the free guide, How to Make a Pottery Glaze, you would literally just so Cornish stone, 50 parts. So you could just do 50 grams of that. Quartz, 25 parts. So just do 25 grams of quartz. Whiting, 15 parts. Just do 15 grams of whiting. And then dolomite, 10 parts. That's just 10 grams of dolomite. So, um, yeah, that's how parts work. And then if you wanted to make like more glaze, say you tested it, you really liked it, you could make, say for example, you could scale that up to 1 kilogram of glaze, or you could scale it up to scale it up to like 2 kilograms. So that in that way, you would do say if you were doing 1 kilogram of glaze, you would and so yeah, sorry, just to say these are always dry ingredients. So you're always weighing out the dry ingredients. And so you can just use any kind of any weight that you normally use. I would just maybe use grams. That's what I normally use. So, for example, if you're making a kilogram of glaze, you would do 500 grams of the Cornish stone, 250 grams of the quartz, and then 150 grams of whiting, and then 100 grams of dolomite. Just wondering whether that does add up to, yeah, it does add up to 100. Not all the recipes do, but yeah. Um, Okay, so that's how to work with parts. And then to say water they never really tell you how much water to use. And what you're doing there is you're just basically, once you've weighed out all the dry ingredients, you just, weigh them. A really top tip for weighing out dry ingredients, because a lot of them all look the same, like a white powder, basically. If you're adding them all to the same bowl, but you accidentally add too much in, it's really difficult then to like take out, 5 grams of the quartz because it looks really like 5 grams of the whiting or the dolomite. So a really good thing, a method that I use basically is I actually weigh out each one separately, and then I know exactly how much I've got in the bowl. I can really easily take them out. So if it maybe if you were doing a cake or something, you just chuck it all in, like, oh, I just chuck the sugar and stuff in and chuck the flour in. But like with glaze making, I do like to weigh them separately and then add them all in like a bucket or something at the end, just so I yeah can really control like how much is going in the weighing bowl. So yeah, so okay, so adding the water. So there is no guide to adding water, unfortunately. This is another thing that really confused me actually as well. I was like, well, how much water do I add? But like you basically just want to add enough water to make it into the consistency of, say, like for example, maybe like a cream, like a sort of single cream type consistency. So what you do is you add a bit of water, start mixing it. Obviously, you're wearing your FFP3 face mask because this can actually create quite a lot of dust at this point. Don't want to be breathing that in. And then keep on adding water and keep on mixing until all the ingredients are kind of mixed in, and you'll get a kind of glaze which is a bit like, yeah, the consistency of like sort of single cream. If you've added too much water, this is not a problem. You have not ruined your glaze. It's absolutely fine. All you do is you wait for the glaze to settle, and then you can scoop the water off the top. So glazes, ash glazes especially tend to settle really, really fast. So if you're using ash as one of the ingredients, I'll do another episode actually on specifically like how to make an ash glaze, because it's very similar, but you just need to process the ash by like sieving it first. So they settle really, really quickly. Other glazes, they also settle pretty quickly. And then you can just literally scoop the water off. If you haven't added enough water, the glaze will just be, it will just mean that when you're applying it, it'll just be a little bit thick on the pot. And it could maybe, for example, like run down on the side, or it might just be like, might end up encouraging it to like craze a bit or something. But you can literally just add a little bit more water. And as glazes like so you're sort of maybe making it so you can store it in some kind of lidded container. But even if a glaze container has a lid on it, it does still dry out sometimes. So you do sometimes need to adjust the water. So every time you use a glaze, generally, you just stir it up. See the kind of consistency, and if it's a little bit thick, you can just add a little touch of water and give it a stir again, and that's what you're trying to aim for, sort of single cream. Although ash glazes tend to need to be a tiny bit thicker than that. So yeah, so basically you've got your glaze, you've mixed all the water in, you've mixed your all your powders together. The next stage is simply just to sieve it. And the reason we're sieving it is because we just want to make sure all of the lumps of rock, just like you would sieve, flour before adding it to a cake or something, but with glazes you just sieve them after you've made them, and that just makes sure that everything's incorporated into the glaze. So yeah, Cornish stone especially is an ingredient that tends to have like tiny little lumps in. And so it's really worth sieving. So you can sieve it through, there's loads of glaze making sieves that you can get just at the pottery supplier. I have, you can get them online as well. Like I have a 100 mesh size sieve for weighing, so for sieving ash, and that's what I use for sieving ash. And then I sieve an ash glaze then through that sieve. That's just a metal sieve that I got online. Or you can normally, if you're adding any kind of oxide to a glaze. So, for example, that 100 parts will be your base glaze recipe, and then you can add like a percentage of an oxide on top of that. So, for example, in eco-conscious pottery color, I talk about glazes. I've put loads of recipes for glazes which are made with the eco-conscious colorants like verdigris, which is a pigment that you can make yourself from copper, from waste copper, or rust. You can make be careful with rust, obviously, like don't cut yourself on the rust, but you can use that's iron oxide basically that you can then use in a pottery glaze to color the glaze. So, for example, just showing you like a kind of greenish glaze. So this glaze recipe, for example, is feldspar 56 parts, quartz 22 parts, whiting 13 parts, and then ash. It's like wood ash I've used 9 parts. And then this one is actually coloured with verdigris the pigment at 1.5%. So what you're doing is you're always weighing out your base glaze recipe, and then you're adding on top of that. So say for example, you made 100 grams of that glaze, you would need 1.5 grams of the verdigris pigment. And you can get like really, really, if you're making like little tests, you can get these like really sensitive kind of pharmaceutical scales to weigh out really tiny amounts of oxide, verdigris or rust, or you might want to use another oxides. But so that's to say, yeah, it's really important to sieve your glaze after making it, especially if you're using oxides, because it really helps disperse the oxide in the glaze. So some potters use, for example, a 120 mesh size sieve. That's a very fine sieve. Yeah, ash glazes, you probably can't really sieve them through that. It's probably going to be like a 100 mesh size sieve because their particles tend to be a little bit bigger. And yeah, the 120 mesh size sieve is perfect for sieving glazes with oxides in, because it'll really, really properly disperse that oxide throughout the glaze. So the next stage is really just to kind of store your glaze, like I said, in a lidded container. So you can get these special buckets. Just looking around for a bucket. Let me just show you this one. So this is just a white lidded bucket. But you can get these from pottery suppliers. Sometimes the ingredients actually come in a bucket that you can then, reuse for your glaze, and they've just got a lid on that makes sure that yeah, the glaze doesn't dry out. Label your glaze. That's really good to do, because then it's just like helps you to know what you've made. I quite forget sometimes, like which one is that? So it's really, really good to like label your glaze. Yeah, or you can use any lidded container. So you could use a jar, you could use, any kind of, you could use a Tupperware pot if you wanted with a lid. But yeah, using a lid is really good because then it stops it from drying out. And then, like I said, when you come to use your glaze, you're just stirring it up every time, and then you're using your glaze. And then that's it. You've actually made your pottery glaze. So that is literally it. So first decide. So first of all, get an FFP3 face mask. That's, yeah, you're using it throughout any powdered process in pottery. So number one, FFP3 face mask. Number two, decide whether to make an earthenware or a stoneware glaze, depending on how you can fire that glaze. Number three, get a recipe, an appropriate fire temperature recipe, glazy.org. I've got loads of books, free guide to making a stoneware pottery glaze, which you can get in the show notes. And then you're getting all your dry ingredients, bringing them together, weighing them out. Weigh them out before bringing them together. Weigh them out with just kitchen scales. Bring them together in a bucket, or any kind of container you're using. Add a bit of water, add a bit more water, keep going until you're kind of satisfied with the consistency. Sieve it, and then put the lid on that bucket, and then label it, and that's it. You've made a glaze. So how doable is that? You can do it. If you want to make a glaze, you absolutely can. So thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. Wishing you very, very happy potting until next time. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you then, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye. Thank you so much for joining me on that episode. And if you want to find out more about eco-friendly pottery, head over to the Oxford Clay website, which is www.oxfordclay.co.uk. Can't wait to see you there.